Hey everyone, welcome back to the Central Mind Podcast. I'm your host, Tony DeVito. Today we're diving into two major stories that have been making headlines across the nation. Both are troubling in different ways, but they each highlight deep social issues we're grappling with. So let's get into it. And before we get too far in, I just want to apologize for my voice today. I've been sick the last week, and at one day I lost my voice, and another day I sounded like RFK Jr., and today I barely sound like myself. So the first story I want to start with is about the racist text messages that were targeting Black Americans after the election. So this story is not only appalling, but deeply disturbing. Over the past week, Black Americans in multiple states, including Alabama, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, have reported receiving racist text messages. These messages sent anonymously instructed recipients to report to plantations for cotton picking. It's a disgusting throwback to slavery and a stark reminder of the racism that still does exist in our society today. Here's what we know so far. Federal and state authorities, including the FBI and Federal Communications Commission, are investigating these incidents. The message appears to have been sent using the Text Now messaging service. Thankfully, Text Now acted quickly, disabling the accounts involved, but the damage was already done. Text Now is an app that you can download on your phone, and you can create a temporary phone number in which you can send text messages and receive text messages on. People will do this because they don't want to. Maybe a girl meets a guy and he would like to have her phone number, but she's playing it safe and decides to give him a fake phone number, a phone number that she created from Text Now or another app like that, where she doesn't have to give out her real phone number and she can text back and forth with this individual and determine during that period of time whether or not he's trustworthy enough to give her real number to. People will use that for those reasons, but unfortunately, these folks who sent out these racial text messages used it for these more devious and evil reasons. Civil rights group, including the NAACP, have condemned the text, calling them a chilling example of the racial hostility on the rise in America. Authorities are urging anyone who receives these messages to report them immediately to local law enforcement and the FBI. I think it's important to highlight, as disgusting and reprehensible as this behavior is, this does not reflect the feelings, actions, or thoughts of the majority of the people in this country. This is a very small minority committing these heinous acts. Now, we should, of course, do everything within our power to root these people out and to bring them to justice for harassment. You have the right to think and feel the way you want and even say what you want, but you don't have the right to harass or threaten others. This is absolutely gross. Again, I just want to remind people that this behavior, it's of the few. The majority of this country does not feel that way. The people sending these text messages and the news reporting it surely would like you to think that this problem is more widespread than it really is. Remember, people like this, as well as the news, feed off of your fears and anxiety. We are a country built from a diverse group of ethnicities and cultures. As our country progresses, that will continue to progress as well, and tolerance for one another will also continue to progress. This current turmoil that we have right now in our country, with the division that has been created, has been done so by politicians. Politicians have fueled this fire, and they are stoking it in hopes that your fears and your anxieties will ensure that you continue to vote for them and keep them in power. And that is actually a good segue into my next story, which is the FEMA official who was fired over alleged political bias. This troubling story involves what we would expect to be a trusted government agency, FEMA. While storms ravaged both Florida and North Carolina, we heard rumors of people in both Florida and North Carolina claiming that FEMA was not helpful to Trump supporters. Of course, FEMA and the news denied these claims and stated that this was just another lie from the Trump campaign and its supporters. It was just another crazy far right-wing conspiracy theory. Well, guess what? It was not a conspiracy theory. It was true. At least in Florida, anyway. Marnie Washington, a FEMA supervisor, was recently fired for instructing her team not to provide disaster relief to homes displaying Trump campaign signs in Florida. The message she sent to her team members in the internal messaging app for FEMA said the following: implement best practices. Bullet point 1. No one goes anywhere alone. Bullet point 2. which is the very next directive, it says, avoid homes advertising Trump. Wow. I mean, just wow. What kind of shit is this? So this is not a conspiracy theory. Her team, which was working in Florida at the time, clearly was instructed to not help Trump supporters. A government agency using its power and influence to punish our country's citizens because of their political affiliation. This is a gross abuse of power, and it's dangerous. This directive is a shocking breach of the agency's mission to provide aid to the disaster survivors regardless of political affiliation. Here's where things get complicated. Marnie Washington, she claims that she's just a scapegoat and insists that her directive was part of a broader unofficial FEMA policy designed to protect staff from potentially hostile environments. FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell has pushed back strongly against this, stating that Washington's actions violated the agency's core values. Well, at least somebody's saying that. The incident has sparked investigations by both federal authorities and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who's vowed to get to the bottom of any political motivated discrimination within FEMA. It's a situation that raises serious questions about impartiality in disaster relief and whether trust in these institutions can be restored. I will be very interested to hear if FEMA passed that directive down to each of their crew supervisors or if it was something that just Marnie Washington took upon herself to enact. Either way, it is unacceptable. If Marnie Washington did this on her own accord, she's been fired and the problem's been resolved, assuming no other supervisors did the same. However, those who followed her instructions should be fired as well. To me, that is not a lawful order, and you know that it is discrimination, and if you followed that order, you should be fired. If the directive came from the very top of FEMA, and all crews and supervisors passed that directive on, then everyone from the top of FEMA should be fired, and so should the supervisors who sent that directive, and so should the employees who followed that directive. Hell, I'm okay with wiping FEMA clean, firing everybody, and starting from ground zero. Both of these stories reveal troubling trends in our society. If we don't fight back against these disgusting acts of discrimination, then we are at risk of losing our country. Our nation isn't perfect, and it never has been, and it never will be. America was birthed from discrimination and from the oppression of others, but, well, so was, every other nation in the history of the world. It is unfortunately part of human nature. However, America has done an amazing job in just 240 years of existence. America has done more than any other country to become as equitable as it is within that amount of time compared to, any other nation. Can we do better? Absolutely. Damn right we could do better. We have a long way to go. But we are by far better off than most other nations, if not all of them. England has been around much longer than the United States, and they have yet to have a black man or woman lead their nation. Yes, England has had a woman as a leader to their nation, more than once, actually. And America, we're getting closer and closer. But it took England almost 450 years before they finally had a woman rule over their nation. We are currently on year 248, and I think our country has been ready for a president for at least 10 years now. Hillary Clinton, as polarizing as she has been one of the most hated women in politics, and she still won the popular vote back in 2016. Of course, she did not win the electorate, but I think it was clear that if she won the popular vote, then this country was ready for a woman to be president. Kamala Harris was the wrong choice for the Democrat Party this time around, and she was not qualified for the position of president of the United States. Not because she's a woman, but because she can't put a sentence together without a teleprompter. That doesn't instill confidence in voters if you're only able to speak and run on sentences and incomplete thoughts that don't relate to the topics on hand. When I was growing up, from a boy to a young man to an adult, it felt like race relations were getting better and better in our country as time went on. When I first started dating black women, I was in middle school, which was the mid-1990s. Myself and the girl would be teased or get strange looks from our peers because we were a couple. In high school, nobody batted an eye at the idea of me dating a black girl or a dark Hispanic girl. Then in college, I met my first wife, who was from Kenya, and we did get harassed, but it was from black men. We didn't get harassed by white people or black women, just black men, and that was disheartening and disappointing to me, and especially at the time to my wife. Now, I'm not telling you this to point out that racism is higher by one group or another. I'm only providing you with my experience, which may be entirely different than the experience of someone else in a similar circumstance. By the time our marriage had run its course, we almost never encountered any harassment or strange looks, and we started to see more and more interracial relationships, which I thought was a good sign and this country was heading in the right direction. Then in 2012, I had my daughter, who was mixed. Sometimes I would be out for dinner with my daughter when she was still a baby, and I would get judgmental and just downright nasty looks sometimes from old white women. Yep, that's right. A lot of old white women did not like a beautiful mixed little baby girl just because her skin color. It's really disgusting. The good thing is that this is the old guard. These old-ass racist white ladies were set to die off soon along with their hateful thoughts and ideas. So since then, almost a third of the kids in my daughter's classes that she goes to school with are mixed or have mixed siblings. There has been a great deal of progress. However, in the political realm, I think we've regressed quite a bit. Ever since Trayvon Martin was killed in February of 2012 by George Zimmerman, there has been an increase in racial divide in this country. Clearly, Zimmerman profiled Trayvon Martin because he was a young black man with a hoodie, and Zimmerman harassed him and followed him until Trayvon Martin finally had enough and approached him, and they got into a fight that ended in Zimmerman shooting and killing Trayvon Martin. The entire thing was unfortunate, and it turned into this whole white versus black situation. Crazy thing is that Zimmerman was Hispanic, clearly Hispanic, but that was never mentioned by the news and the politicians at the time because they wanted to use that as an opportunity to divide our nation so that the mention of Zimmerman being Hispanic was avoided as much as possible. They wanted to use this as a white versus black issue. They wanted to race bait the country and gaslight us, and it worked, and it's gotten much, much worse since then. Now, don't get me wrong, I think Zimmerman was totally wrong. It was racially driven. I think he likely profiled Martin because he was black, and that is wrong. And that is something we definitely need to stop doing. But since then, we have had escalation after escalation of the news and politics drawing us further and further from each other. The issue with police shootings against the black population since 2012 has been argued ad nauseum. It should be discussed and litigated. Clearly, our police need new training, and we need to do a better job of convicting police who have abused their power, which I believe we have done since the George Floyd murder, and I'm sure more needs to be done. However, along the way, there have been a lot of false narratives like Michael Brown and the hands up, don't shoot narrative, which was not true. Many of the politicians and the news media knew it was not true, and they were still pushing it in hopes to divide the country even further. People who believed it was true at the time could tout themselves as caring and not racist, where those who said it was not true were called racist and disgusting people. And when the racism issue wasn't working as well as they wanted it to anymore, they threw in the gender issue. And now we started arguing over transgender rights and whether or not young children should be able to have themselves mutilated and turned into the other sex. And they just keep piling it on. Whatever they can do to divide us, they will. And now the left is telling people to cut off their family, not to invite them over for holidays if they voted for Trump. It sounds like a cult. Their cult is a cult of division. They have created a greater racial divide, which has given the racists in this country more confidence to come out and do terrible things like sending racist text messages like they did just day after the election. They are quick to blame that on Trump. However, Trump's rhetoric did not embolden racists. It was the media and the leftist politicians who created lies about what Trump said that created racial divide. Like the very fine people on both sides hoax. He never said that there were very fine people on both sides when referring to the white nationalists and neo-Nazis. He said quite the opposite. Here, have a listen for yourself. This may be the first time you ever heard it.
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name.
Robert E. Lee are not the same.
Well, no, George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, excuse me, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him?
I do love
Okay,
Thomas
good.
Jefferson.
Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group also, you had some fine people, but you also had troublemakers, and you see them come with the black outfits and with the helmets and with the baseball bats. You had a lot of bad people in the other group too.
Treated unfairly, sir. I'm sorry, I just didn't understand what you were saying. You were saying the press has treated white nationalists unfairly?
No,
I just didn't understand what you were saying.
No. There were people in that rally, and I looked the night before. If you look, there were people protesting very quietly the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. I'm sure in that group there were some bad ones. The following day it looked like they had some rough, bad people, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, whatever you want to call them. But you had a lot of people in that group that were there to innocently protest.
And there you have it. He outright condemned the neo-Nazis and white nationalists. He meant that there were good people on both sides of the issue, people who wanted to keep the statue up and people who wanted to take the statue down. That there were two separate groups of protesters and there were fine people in both of those groups. But you also had people from Antifa and people from white nationalist groups that showed up to cause trouble and created violence. And those people are not part of what he meant when he said very fine people. And he clearly explained that during that press conference. And what's sad is that just in this last election cycle, that this whole lie made up by the left and the media about the very fine people hoax, Barack Obama is still repeating it during rallies for Harris. It's unacceptable. It's examples like that that allowed the media and the left to label Trump as a racist. They used false stories and lies to create that image, and that is what's emboldened racists in our country. Not Trump, but those who tell any possible lie to make Trump look like a racist so they can create division. From 2012 to 2024, it's just gotten worse. Trump is Hitler, they would start saying, and his followers are Nazis. They want to essentially divide half of the country against the other half. This is the news, media, and politicians doing this to us. This is not what we want. This is what they want and what we're falling for. Can we get back to pre-2012 sentiment in this country, where race relations were steadily getting better? As a nation, I think we need to come together and say enough is enough with the race baiting and gaslighting. And I think it's exactly what over 76 million people voted for on November 5th when they voted for Donald Trump as their new president. More of the Black, Hispanic, female, and youth voted more than ever for Republican this time around. And why is that? Do you think it's because they believe Trump is a white nationalist racist? You believe the increase in Black and Hispanic votes are because Trump is a racist? No, of course not. It's because they figured it out. They know the same thing that I know. They know that this is the left lying and telling them that Trump is a racist, and they know it's not true. All you have to do is just sit and listen to Trump, and you'll know that he's not a racist. Sure, he says a lot of dumb shit sometimes, and he's clumsy with his words, but he's not a racist. This country is being aggressively and systematically torn apart by liberal politicians in the media, and people are finally fed up with it. November 5th was the rejection of all of that. Those people who sent those text messages and those idiots at FEMA, they've been emboldened by the same people, the liberal media and the people with Trump derangement syndrome. I hope people can start getting a grip now. Digressing back to the main stories on today's podcast, I will update you as I receive more updates on the racist text messages and the discriminatory FEMA directive. Thank you again for tuning in for today's episode of the Central Mind Podcast. If you have any thoughts on either of these stories, I'd love to hear from you. Reach out on social media or comment below. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with anyone who would appreciate these discussions. Until next time, stay informed, stay curious. This is Tony signing off.